Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Animorphs, a totally insane, totally awesome series of books. So here's how it's going to go. With Animorphs, they have their series of books, and then there was also a show. There are also video games, and later down the line, graphic novels, audiobooks, and a movie's being planned. So there's a lot going on, and I want to talk about like these different mediums and how math is used in Animorphs in these different mediums. And so yeah, I'm gonna have fun. There might be some light spoilers, so if you want to avoid those, you should. That's fair. If you don't care, that's fair too. Welcome aboard. And I hope that if you haven't read Animorphs, you'll want to by the end of this. If you have, I hope you want to revisit Animorphs. If not reading the books over again, just thinking about Animorphs a bit more. That being said, let's dive in. So Animorphs, like I said, a totally insane, totally awesome series of books. That's what it is. There are 54 main titles. Then there are, so those are for the regular Animorph books, right? Then there are four Megamorph books, which still deal with continuity of the main lines, but they're a bit more massive in scope. And then there are four Chronicle stories, where you find out a little bit more about a character or a species. There's a lot of character development in these stories. And then there are two Alternamorphs, which, they're choose your own adventure books. They're game books. So it gets pretty wild. And it takes us to a grand total of 64 books. That's a lot. And with the Alternamorphs, they're non-canon. So, with that in mind, there are 62 main. There are 62 books that actually pertain to the story, with the 54 main ones and the 8 that do pertain to the main continuity but are different in nature and tone. So that's pretty cool. And throughout, you're dealing with all these crazy themes in the stories. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about that for a bit. So I'm going to talk about the initial premise and kind of go from there, and we'll kind of like flow into everything else. So the idea is that you have your 5 main characters, and they run into an alien. The alien has a morphing cube. This morphing cube, once touched, will allow them the ability to morph into any animal that they touch, but only for 2 hours at a time, or else they cannot return to their normal form. Math. So yeah, there's math in how morphing works. Just from a time constraint level, but there's math in changing your body, you know, and there's math in how the story is spread out. Each book in the main series kind of has a formula to it. They're kind of episodic in nature, but as you go on through the book, a major event happens throughout the war that the main characters have with the big bad. And throughout the series, you deal with the idea that you have these people who can now morph that are dragged into this intergalactic war where they have to covertly fight their enemies using guerrilla warfare. And they're kids. They're either preteens or teens. It's unclear in the beginning, but I know by the end of the war they're definitely teenagers. But no matter how you cut it, they're kids. So you're dealing with war. You're dealing with child soldiers. You're dealing with the complexities of morality and what it takes to win. You're dealing with moral gray areas because the good guys, they're the good guys, but they do bad things sometimes. And the idea is like the outside of the humans, there are several alien species that you encounter, with the main two being the Andalites, which are supposed to be the good guys, and the Yeerks, which are the bad guys relatively speaking. But they both were kind of awful in their own right, and in the story you kind of get into that. And then you have like the human characters. Later they get like an Andalite that works with them. But so you have like six main characters by the time everything is said and done, and they all do questionable things at times. And so throughout the stories you get into that. Now with the storytelling, like I said, there's kind of like a formula, right? There's kind of a flow to it, right? You have the characters moving throughout the story, and their character is getting developed. You're getting their perspective on the current war, on their life, and throughout it, there's a build up to some big event that's going to happen by the end of that book that they're going to have to tackle. And there are themes that keep on coming up throughout the books. Each book, there's not a set page limit, but the idea is each book is divided into chapters, right? And each book is a certain amount of pages, whatever it takes to tell the story, but they're all around the same length. They're all about like 100 and something in length for the main books. So there's math in the formula to tell this story. There's math in what you need to construct the book, right? And there's math in how big you want the font, and how you design a book, how you design a cover. And I think that's really cool. And with the cover, and also something that I want to talk about in a bit, is the idea of morphing. So in on the cover you see like a static image of a character morphing into an animal typically. um, eh, because sometimes like with the Andalite you see that Andalite morph into a human, but the whole point is like you'll see a character morphing, so you see this like static image of that, right? And that's really cool. It drew my attention. I remember I was 10 years old. I was going to the Scholastics book fair. And so I see this book. There's a boy on the cover. That boy is morphing into a spider. And that was really cool. And I got curious, and it says like Animorphs. And like, I am a big fan of animals. So I had to know more. I read the cover and it sounded really interesting. And so with the book, it was like number 10, but I didn't care. It looked really cool, and they gave a summary of the story in the back, so it kind of caught me up to speed. And later on, I would read the books. I read them all out of order, mind you, in the beginning, but I read them, and I got hooked in. And so at a certain point, I was reading them as they were coming out, because like by the time I got to the books, right, they were been out for a while. They've been out for about a year, and so for me, it was really cool because I read those books from like pretty much age 10 to about like 14, 15, and it was cool. But yeah, so there's morphing in color, and that drew you in right away. And like there's math in all of it, right? And how a color is designed and how the book works, right? Because everything is precise, right? There's math in how a character is drawn. There's math in that morphing element, right? There's math in how the inking is done, right? Which colors you want to choose, the position of the title and the author's name, right? And how it all goes together. And because they wrote things in this really cool and interesting way, you could jump in. You'd be drawn in by the color. You could jump in after reading the back, because like with any given book, you were never super lost. They were very good about that, and there's math in that. There's precision in that, and that's cool. And in the book itself, if you look at each page, uh, there's a picture at the end of each page. It's the character morphing into the animal. And if you're flipping those pages, you get an animation of the character morphing to what they were morphing to in the cover. So that's really cool because, right, you have to consider the amount of pages in the book, math in that, but also each frame, so to speak, because like you can view the corner of each page or each yeah, sorry, give me a second. You can view each corner on each right page is a frame, and the frame amount matches the number of pages, and you have to consider the size in there to make sure everything looks like accurate and is in proportion to what it should be, and then you get yourself a nice animation. And it was kind of cool because you're kind of naturally encouraged to flip as you go on, and I think that's awesome. So yeah, there's a lot of math in the story and how it flows and how it functions. There's math in the morphing itself, both in the time constraint and actually changing your body into another animal. And there's so much like implications with that. And just there's math in the Animorphs world because there's math in our world everywhere, right? So it's everywhere in there too. But there's math in how you tell the story. And then you get like so there's a formula to that, right? But there's also a formula to the other books too. So with the Megamorph books, they were like larger in scope, right? And so they were big, and there was a lot to consider in what they wanted to tell within a given book. So they had to consider that when writing those, right? And there's a lot of math in deciding that, and writing a longer book and writing a larger scale book. And then the things I think that really got interesting, because Megamorphs were fun, they were like big events, but honestly, I don't think you really remember what happened in them, right? I think the only thing that I vaguely remember about the Megamorphs is the one where there was freaking time travel. Yeah, because that was a thing in that universe that got established at some point, and it got kind of wild. So I remember that. But the big thing for me that stood out for those like books outside of the main continuity was the Chronicle series. They had the Analyte Chronicles, which was amazing. They had the Hork-Bajir Chronicles. They had the Elemis Chronicles, and they had Visor, which didn't have Chronicles in the title, but it was a Chronicle book. It was a little different from some of the other ones, but it still had that like deep character development and establishing more lore and history. And there's math and all that. And these books were larger. So they had to do a lot more with them, and I think that's really cool. And something else worth noting about the books is that at a certain point, about like midway through, a lot of them were actually ghost written. And here's the thing about that: it wasn't just someone doing it willy nilly. So K.A. Applegate is the author of the books, and I thought that was just it when I was younger, but K.A. Applegate was the name that Catherine Applegate used with her husband Michael Grant as they wrote the book. So they co-wrote it, and with the ghost writers, they had outlines. They had certain things that they had to hit. So it wasn't like they were just letting them do whatever. It was very tightly controlled, and these books were coming out like a month at a time. And like you heard what I said at the beginning, there's a lot of them. There's 64 total. So I get it. And I think it's interesting with the ghostwriters because not only did they give them an outline, but it really seems like they picked good ghostwriters because you really didn't notice the difference unless you were like looking for it. You might notice something slightly different in the writing style, but I think for the most part, the ghostwriters nailed it. Because it was a small thing that you might be like, oh, that's different, but you wouldn't think, oh, well, this is written by another person, and I think that's amazing. So they had a system, right? And meanwhile, while they're doing all this, Scholastics was pushing them on ahead. They were getting deals. They were doing different things, right? They ended up doing a show. There was an Animorph show, and so there was a lot going on, right? And with the Animorph show, I think that's interesting because it was going on throughout the run of the book. The book was still going on like after it, actually. Um, so the show ran for 2 seasons. It adapted a lot of things from the book, and I think that's pretty cool because, they have all the things that you mentioned with stories in a book, as far as like how the layout can go, because they have to consider um, a certain amount of episodes per season and a certain time constraint there. So it's similar to storytelling in a book, but different, right? There's still like a certain amount that they're considering to be covered. There's a better way to say that. Um, so there's a certain amount of material that they want to get across, and they have an idea of like how many pages in a book that they want to cover, and for TV, how many shows that they want to cover, right? Now with TV though, they have more time constraints because when you're reading, you don't have to worry about that as much. Now, the writers might want it to be a certain size, like for the book, and there's that. But for the TV show, you have like it varies for TV show to TV show, but you have like 20 minutes sometimes, half an hour if you're lucky, or an hour in some cases. But the point is, you have to do everything in a set time limit as far as that goes, constraint wise. And so there's math in that, and it's worth considering. And then the other thing is budget, right? There's math in money. There's math in the budget. They can only do certain many things, and then they're doing the show in conjunction with the book. So they have to be selective with their material and try to cram it together, but not run out of material. And I think that's interesting to consider. And then there's there's animation involved. There's math in that. There's math in the lighting, the sound effects, the actors, their positions, how they say lines, how they breathe. There's math in all of it, right? There's so much precision and control involved in that process, and I think that's fascinating. And then there were games. I played one. I played one for the Game Boy Color. It was pretty cool. But in that game, they have to have the idea of health. They have to have the morphing. They have to have time limits on the morphing. They have to decide how many segments of the game they want. There's math in all that. There's math in programming it. There's math in the development as a whole. There's math in making it work for the Game Boy. There's math in all of it and getting it out there into the world. And I think that's really cool. So with Animorphs though, like I said, I grew up on it. It was a great series. It was weird. It was wild. There was a lot of sci-fi in there. Like I mentioned, there was time travel. There's aliens, morphing, and back to the aliens. Some of those aliens were like literal gods at a certain point. 'Cause, you had the elements, you had the Krayak. They were like pretty much omnipotent. Um, as far as we know. Yeah, so then there was all this sort of wacky stuff and cool connections, and the series took children seriously. They made it cool, they made it action packed, but they made you think about war and what it does, and violence and what's necessary versus what's not, and can you be good if you're doing bad things? And if you didn't do anything, would you be good in that case? Because you're letting bad things happen. It made you ponder those things, and it didn't always provide a clear answer. But the idea to me was that it is fairly anti-war, but it acknowledges the complications with that. And I think the characters are pretty well developed. You got a good sense of who they were early on, and they grow and they develop, and things get more complicated. And as the war goes on, characters change. You can feel it weighing on some people. They cover a lot, and again, some of the stories, despite all the heavy stuff they do, can get silly in some regards and very very interesting in other regards. There's just so much cool stuff, and I can't express how much I enjoyed the series, and I enjoyed the main series as a whole. I'm kind of indifferent to the Megamorph series. They were there, but like I said, they were pretty much these big level events. You remember they happened, you enjoyed the ride, but you don't remember much about them. But with the Chronicles, they were next level. They gave you some new lore. They gave you this insight into characters that you'd otherwise not get insight to. They let you see who was good and who was bad in some cases, because, like I said, the Analytes and Yeerks, they were I think the two biggest species that you talk about. I mean, there's other ones, and definitely different aliens that the Yeerks control. That they use to host, but the two big alien species are the Animalites and the Yeerks, and not all the Yeerks are as bad as you think that they would be, though. Yeah, most of them are, but with the Animalites, they're not as good as you think that they are, and they get into all that and the dangers of giving them technology to certain civilizations, and also talking about fate and destiny and all that good stuff. So yeah, Animorphs was an amazing story with a lot of sci-fi, a lot of weird scenarios, and a lot of just utter insanity and war. And I think it's really cool because in this series, you can have these children fighting, this guerrilla warfare, and they're animals and it's brutal and they kill, it's killed or be killed and they're doing all that. But then you get androids, you get time travel, you get gods fighting one another in some like eternal war. You get like a bunch of crazy stuff. It's all cool, and I like how like life is an animal when they morph is described and the thoughts that come with that, because that when they change into animals, there's certain instincts that pop in, and they get into that. But in any case, Animorphs is a totally insane, totally awesome series of books that I remember fondly, that I found deeply thought provoking, that I enjoyed back then, and if I ever had time to read them, I'm sure I like in my current life, I'm sure that I would enjoy them again because they never talk down to kids, and I think that's important when you're writing a book. You can write it so that it's enjoyable and it could be directed at kids, but you don't have to be demeaning about it. And I think Animorphs was a very successful series that did that. And they did buku bucks. They made a lot of money, and I think that's cool. And the authors are still writing to this day. And Animorphs, well, I don't think a lot of people talk about it. It's never fully gone away, and there's still that upcoming movie. And so I'm definitely curious to see how things will go. I've enjoyed talking about this, and there's some links in the description for some Animorph videos that like go really in depth this with the whole series as a whole, not just with the more mathematical aspects of it. So if you want to explore, that would be good. If you want to read the books, that would be good. If you just enjoyed this video, that's good too. In any case, I hope you had a blast. I hope you learned some more about Animorphs. I hope you have a different perspective on math and how it's used in various things. And I hope you have a great day. Professor Prime out.